Hi everybody, my name is Ryan Henry and this is my project titled Building the Foundations, a Micro-credential Framework for Climate Resilient CTE Pathways. To give you a brief overview of the contents, we'll first start with some background information, then move into the issue at hand, then the framework that I've created, and then finally some future implications for this work. The window of opportunity for this project starts in 2022 when California passed the Golden State Pathways Program Act to distribute funding to California public high schools for the growth and establishment of career technical education or CTE programs. The act allotted $500 million for the development of these CTE pathways with high priority in education, computer science, healthcare, and STEM climate resilience, which is the focus of this presentation. Districts applied for a grant to upgrade their CTE pathways or to create entirely new pathways. That was up to the discretion of the district. Grant decisions were publicly released in October of 2025, which brings us pretty much up to date to today. So CTE, or career technical education, originated to prepare students to work primarily in the trades, but has since evolved to encompass pathways to technical jobs, as well as post-secondary and secondary opportunities. Students who participate in CTE programs complete a sequence of courses throughout the 4 years of high school that combine the core academic knowledge needed to graduate with a diploma with additional courses specific to their sector that they've chosen. At the end of a pathway, the student receives a certification in recognition for completing all of the required courses. The classes a CTE student takes are determined by what's called the Model Curriculum Standards, which outline what knowledge is required for a career in their selected industry. The curriculum standards that guide development of CTE pathways are state-specific, so California has its own model of industry sectors. In the bubbles on the screen there, you see two examples, the energy, environment, and utilities sector, as well as the agriculture and natural resources sector. Notice that climate resilience is not listed in either one of those. A crucial part of CTE is the collaboration between school sites and industry partners that provides hands-on learning experiences to students. This is a map that I've made that shows the breakdown of the schools that will be implementing STEM climate resilience pathways throughout California. There are 7. We have 2 in San Diego County, 3 in Orange County, 1 in Santa Barbara County, and 1 in Mendocino County. You can see the spread of them on this map, and then the upper corner is a zoom in of the Orange County schools so you can see them better. The issue at hand here is that STEM climate resilience as a CTE has not existed before. These schools that are planning to implement it are now going to have something brand new with no precedent on how to teach it. And there will be educators who, while qualified and experienced teachers, will now be involved in something that they might not have very much expertise in. The creation of both the Golden State Pathways program and climate resilience as a pathway exists to prepare students for possible future careers. And the addition of the STEM climate resilience pathway is a great opportunity to expand access to both climate literacy and climate careers for young people in a time when working in climate is absolutely crucial. Up until now, there has not been the expectation that teachers are experts in climate resilience, and thus educators will need to be prepared to take on this new and unfamiliar topic. Since this project is in the beginning stages, creating a clear structure now will make it a whole lot easier to expand this pathway as well as others later down the line. The question that I'm both asking and answering with this project is, how can we make this transition easier? To address this question, I've created an adaptable framework to guide the design of a micro-credential program that will support the educators involved with STEM climate resilience CTE pathway so that they can be better prepared to teach climate resilience to their students. A micro-credential is a short course designed to establish competencies in a specific subject area. The concept first originated in the computer science field about 20 years ago, but has since then been making its way into other professions. These courses are offered through accrediting institutions and accumulate in the participant receiving a certificate or a digital badge that signifies that they've completed all of the assigned competencies. For educators, micro-credentials can serve as a professional development training, which is required to happen a certain amount of times a year. And then receiving the credential or digital badge can also provide the teacher with the opportunity to gain additional units and subsequently a salary increase. A micro-credential in this context should equip educators with specific content area knowledge, as well as provide them with tools in the form of lesson plans or class activities that they can take back to their classrooms. That's why micro-credential is so valuable. It goes beyond the simple relaying of information to provide tangible resources to educators teaching these topics. This is a visual representation of the framework that I've created. This is the Foundations framework, and I'll refer to it as Foundations throughout the rest of this presentation. Foundations is made up of 3 concentric circles that I'm calling modules. The first module, represented here by the innermost orange circle, covers the mechanisms of climate change. That asks, what are the driving factors behind this project and how do Earth systems respond? The second module, which is shown by the green circle, covers solutions to climate change, and that asks, what can we actually do about it? And the third module, seen in blue, is called Local Opportunities, and that asks, what kinds of climate resilience careers are available locally for students to pursue? Modules 2 and 3 allow for some differentiation in content depending on regional differences. So, for example, climate issues and the applicable solutions in Santa Barbara might be different than those in Mendocino. Content on climate solutions and local opportunities for climate careers should also reflect these differences throughout the course. To zoom in on each of the modules, starting with Module 1, the goal of this is to understand and explain what physical processes are driving climate change. So content included in this module is the enhanced greenhouse effect, controls on greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon cycle, climate feedbacks, ocean circulation warming and acidification, as well as climate modeling. The content included in each module is meant to be flexible, as I've said. However, there are continuities, and Module 1 is intended to remain fairly consistent throughout the onset of the course, because this is the basis for the rest of what we'll learn. Module 2, Solutions. The goal is to understand the difference between adaptation and mitigation and to be able to explain a few examples of both. The examples you see on the screen here are ones that I've chosen for today, but are by no means the only options for what can be taught. Renewable energy and decarbonization should remain constant in this module, regardless of regional differences, but ecosystem restoration and urban greening are just some of my favorites that I put up for the sake of example. Module 3 is Local Opportunities. This is where we apply learned knowledge of the climate mechanisms and solutions from Modules 1 and 2 to an example of a local career opportunity. A crucial part of CTE learning is the exposure to hands-on experiences that students get. In this module, educators will have a similar experience by visiting with a community collaborator and exploring the climate resilience careers available in that area. This increases the awareness of what kinds of careers students might want to pursue as they move through this pathway. For our purposes today, we're using an example that I'm familiar with, but regional partnerships can span just about anything. Another example could be a construction company retrofitting buildings for energy efficiency. The example on the screen here is a visit to Kendall Frost Marsh Preserve, which many of the people in this room have done, where educators would explore wetland functions like biodiversity, water filtration, and carbon sequestration, and how that has impacts for the local and regional specific climate risks. So in a low-lying coastal area like San Diego, sea level rise, storm surge, and flood frequency are all very much concerns. This is an opportunity to explore the ongoing research, as well as find out what skills and credentials are required for a career in that sector. As I mentioned, assessment is a key part of the micro-credentialing process. This is how accreditors verify that participants have mastered the competencies and are ready to teach them. Foundations uses 3 levels of assessment throughout the process. Starting at the top with formative. A formative assessment is a pre-quiz. It asks, what do you already know about this topic we're about to explore? An example of that can be explain the greenhouse effect in 2 to 3 minutes. And then summative assessments next on the list. That does a short recap. So it asks, what did you learn and how have you applied it? Formative and summative assessments both are intended to be included in all 3 modules, once at the beginning and once at the end. And then the cumulative assessment is an end-of-course recap that reviews all 3 modules, and that asks you to draw connections between the mechanisms, solutions, and local opportunities for careers. That is meant to take a little bit of a longer form, but again, can be flexible depending on the accreditor. So maybe a content exam, a longer writing assignment, or some sort of visual project could be examples. I'd like to walk you through a quick example from one of the modules. So each module is also broken into sections. This is an example from Module 1, Section 3. And that content is greenhouse gases and climate feedbacks. So the key subject material for this section covers controls on greenhouse gas emissions, the global warming potential for each greenhouse gas, and the atmospheric lifetime of greenhouse gases. And then after covering that, it moves into climate feedbacks, so snow ice feedback, cloud feedback, and water vapor feedback, and the effects that those processes have on amplifying climate change. There's then a group activity that is meant to elaborate on the learned content. For this section, the activity is a jigsaw, which means that participants are broken into groups and then assigned a specific area of the content that we've covered to do a deep dive. And then at the end of that, all the groups come back together, combine their research to reveal a big picture of what's happening with climate. The activities included in each module were specifically made for the teachers taking this micro-credential course, but they are easily transferable to a classroom environment. Additionally, at the end of each section, there are more resources for classroom application. There are other example activities and lesson timelines so that educators are walking away with not only a greater understanding of these processes, but also physical resources to aid in their teaching. There are some limitations here, especially given that all of this is relatively new information. Firstly, that course requirements and the model curriculum standards for climate resilience have yet to be announced. California State Board of Education is going to be voting on changes to its industry sectors and the corresponding pathways later in this year. So at which point the framework that I've developed will likely need to be reevaluated to align with those standards more closely. Something else important to highlight is the necessity of collaboration between implementing districts. As I said, there are 7 schools implementing this pathway, and that's 5 different districts. So assuming that a micro-credential of this type is adopted, there will need to be some sort of continuity in between the accrediting institutions. We're expecting standards for students to be universally adopted throughout the state, and thus professional development for the educators teaching to those standards should also be very closely aligned. Of course, we're adjusting for those regional differences. In terms of applications for use, this framework, as I said, it's expected that the model will be adapted to align with standards once they are released. Foundations was designed with the intent to be molded wherever it needs to go, and therefore this structure can be easily transferred to other fields. I focus specifically on STEM climate resilience in this case, but that's not including the over 30 schools who received funding from the same grant to implement pathways such as environmental engineering, resource management, or sustainability, to name a few. The Foundations framework is an organizing principle that's based in 3 modules, exploring climate science, climate solutions, and what careers in climate resilience can actually look like. It was made to support the creation of a micro-credential for educators involved in California's new STEM climate resilience CTE. I believe this framework functions as a strong jumping off point for continuing the conversation around expanding climate literacy and climate career readiness. This topic is brand new, and it's going to need to be tweaked and changed as time goes on. But my hope is that this framework can overcome early barriers to implementation and make this transition as smooth as possible. I'd first like to thank my capstone committee, Dr. Cheryl Peach and Dr. Rachel Millstone, for very generously contributing their time and expertise to guiding this project. Thank you very much to Corey, Jada, and Mark for your constant support of all of us throughout this year. And thank you to my wonderful family for all your encouragement. And most especially, thank you to the class of 2026. It's been an absolute honor. I'm happy to take any questions.
I was hoping that you might be able to elaborate on long-term impacts of this work and how it might be able to increase future income for participants in this program.
Excellent question, thank you. So let me give you a little bit of context. For teacher salaries, the way that those are decided is it's related to the years of experience that you have as an educator, as well as the degree that you have. So if you have 12 years of experience and a bachelor's degree, that puts you at one section on the pay scale. If you have 12 years of experience, a bachelor's degree, and then additional units, which you can receive by taking courses like this, that can put you higher up on the pay scale. So assuming that you're an educator who's taking micro-credential courses, you're gathering units, and that's moving you further and further along so that you might end up with a higher salary once you've accumulated a specific number of units. Thank you for the question.